Hello, welcome back. It is good to have you here. We're continuing our reading of Philip Yancey's The Bible Jesus Read. And hopefully you're enjoying it. The first chapter is the Old Testament worth the effort? And we are now partway through it. It's a section that we're in is now called Quick. What is God like? So let's continue. According to Elaine Storkey, that question, quick, what is God like, was asked by a 5-year-old girl who rushed up to her newborn brother in his hospital room. She shrewdly figured that having just come from heaven, he might have some inside information. Alas, he merely made a gurgling sound and rolled his eyes. The Old Testament provides an answer to the little girl's question, a different answer than we might get from the New Testament alone. Although Jesus is the image of the invisible God, he emptied himself of many of the prerogatives of God in order to become a man. The late Professor Langdon Gilkey used to say that if evangelical Christianity has a heresy, it's the neglect of God the Father, the Creator, Preserver, and ruler of all human history and every human community, in favor of Jesus the Son, who relates to individual souls and their destinies. If we had only the Gospels, we would envision a God who seems confined, all too human and rather weak. After all, Jesus ended up hanging on a cross. The Jews objected so strongly to Jesus because, despite his audacious claims, he did not match their conception of what God is like. They rejected him for not measuring up. The book of Revelation gives a different glimpse of Jesus, blazing light, stunning in glory, unlimited in power. And the Old Testament likewise fills in a different portrayal of God. Like Jesus' original disciples, we need the background picture in order to appreciate how much love the incarnation expressed, how much God gave up on our behalf. Apart from the Old Testament, we will always have an impoverished view of God. God is not a philosophical construct, but a person who acts in history. The one who created Adam, who gave a promise to Noah, who called Abraham and introduced himself by name to Moses, who deigned to live in a wilderness tent in order to live close to his people. From Genesis 1 onward, God has wanted himself to be known. And the Old Testament is our most complete revelation of what God is like. John Updike has said that our brains are no longer conditioned for reverence and awe. The very words sound old-fashioned, and to the degree that they do, to the degree we have strayed from the picture of God revealed in the Old Testament. We cannot box him in and explain him away. God seems a wild and mysterious other, not a God we can easily figure out. No one tells him what to do. The main point in God's blistering speech to Job. I admit that the Old Testament introduces some problems I would rather avoid. Throughout this book, I will struggle with the revelation of God I find there. Consider, therefore, the kindness and sternness of God, wrote Paul to the Christians in Rome. I would rather consider only the kindness of God. But by doing so, I would construct my own image of God instead of relying on God's self-revelation. I dare not speak for God without listening to God speak for himself. It makes an enormous difference how we picture God. Is God an aloof watchmaker who winds up the universe and steps back to watch it wind down on its own? Or is God a caring parent who holds not just the universe, but individual men and women in his hands? I cannot conceive of a more important project than restoring a proper notion of what God is like. Unavoidably, we transfer to God feelings and reactions that come from our human parents. George Bernard Shaw said he had difficulty with God because his father had been a scoundrel, an absentee father who cared mostly about cricket and pubs. Likewise, C.S. Lewis struggled to overcome the imprint left by his own father, a harsh man who would resort to quoting Cicero to his children when scolding them. When his mother died, Lewis said it felt as if Atlantis had broken off and left him stranded on a tiny island. After studying at a public school led by a cruel headmaster who was later certified insane and committed to an institution, Lewis had to overcome the impact of these male figures to find a way to love God. The Old Testament portrays God as a father, yes, but a different kind of father than that encountered by Shaw and Lewis. It portrays God as a lion, but also a lamb, an eagle, but also a mother hen, a king, but also a servant, a judge, but also a shepherd. Just when we think we have God pinned down, the Old Testament introduces a whole new picture of him: a whistler, a barber, a vineyard keeper. Like a drumbeat that never stops in the pages of the Old Testament, we hear the consistent message that this world revolves around God, not us. The Hebrews had an incessant reminders built into their culture. They dedicated their firstborn livestock and children to God, wore portions of the Old Testament on their heads and wrists, posted visible reminders on their doorways, said the word blessed 100 times a day, even wore distinctive hairstyles and sewed tassels on their garments. A devout Jew could barely make it through an hour, much less an entire day, without running smack into some reminder that he or she lived in God's world. Even the Hebrew calendar marked time by events such as the Passover and the Day of Atonement, not merely by a harvest cycle and the moon. The world, they believed, is God's property, and human life is sacred, which simply means that it belongs to God to do with what He wills. This Old Testament notion sounds very un-American. Do not our founding documents guarantee us a right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness? We rebel against any interference with our personal rights and anyone who attempts to set boundaries that might encroach on our personal space. In our secularized, industrialized environment, we can go through an entire week, not just a day, without bumping into a reminder that this is God's world. I remember hearing a chapel message at Wheaton College during the 1970s, when the Death of God movement had reached its peak. Professor Robert Weber chose to speak on the third commandment: "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain." We usually interpreted that commandment in a narrow sense of prohibiting swearing, said Weber, who then proceeded to expand its meaning to never live as though God does not exist. Or, stated positively, always live in awareness of God's existence. The more I study the commandment in its Old Testament environment, the more I agree with Weber. Any key to living in such awareness must be found in the great Jewish legacy of the Old Testament. I'm not proposing that we return to forelocks, phylacteries, and a diet that excludes pork and lobster. And nevertheless, I do believe we have much to learn from a people whose daily lives centered on God. When we look back at the covenant between God and the ancient Hebrews, what stands out to us is its strictness, the seeming arbitrariness of some of its laws. I see no such reaction among the Hebrews themselves. Few of them pleaded with God to loosen the dietary restrictions or eliminate some of their religious obligations. They seemed rather relieved that their God, unlike the pagan gods around them, had agreed to define a relationship with him. As a Puritan scholar, Perry Miller, has said, when you have a covenant with God, you no longer have an ineffable, remote, unapproachable deity. You have a God you can count on. The Hebrews and God had entered into a kind of story together, and everything that their lives sent back echoes of that story. The story was a love story from the very beginning. God chose them not because they were larger and stronger than other tribes, quite the contrary. nor did he choose them for their moral superiority. He chose them because he loved them. Like any starstruck lover, God yearned for a response. All the commands given the Hebrews flowed out of the very first commandment: love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. The Hebrews failed to keep that command, of course. But the reason Christians now call three-fourths of the Bible the Old Testament is that not even that terrible failure could cancel out God's love. God found a new way, a new covenant, or testament of his love. Soren Kierkegaard offers two suggestions for the reader who tackles difficult portions of the Bible. First, read it like a love letter, he says. As you struggle with language, culture, and other barriers, look at them as the necessary work to get to the main crucial message from someone who loves you. Second, act on what you do understand. Kierkegaard dismisses the objection: there are so many obscure passages in the Holy Scriptures, whole books which are almost riddles, with the reply that he would only consider the objection from someone who had fully complied with all the passages that are easy to understand. And that is where we're going to leave you today. We'll see you next time.